Welcome to Evolving Waves, where we ride the waves of diversity to the shores of success. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the host of Evolving Waves and CEO of Stingray Branding, and I am delighted to have Neil Shulman, the founder of In All Kinds of Weather, on the podcast today. We're going to cover what it takes to grow a six-figure following on social media across multiple platforms, as he is one of the largest sports podcast and followings of college athletics, and particularly within the Florida Gators realm. One of the top kind of 3 or 4 people that are being followed, if not potentially number 2. Don't know the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but this is going to be a fun podcast that you don't want to miss. So dive in. I want to thank our sponsor, Stingray Branding, for bringing this podcast to you. If you are looking to generate ROI from your marketing through web design, social media, or any other form of digital marketing, we're the team to help you. Learn more at stingraybranding.com. Neil has grown his podcast over the last 11 years into, like I said, a 6-figure number of followers across all social media platforms, a podcast, a blog, a website. He has spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, some of those lots of fun, some of those rather frustrating, watching Florida Gator athletics, learning how to perfect his craft, learning technology, and investing what it takes to grow that kind of following, which is not easy. And of course, whenever you have that number of followers, you face scrutiny. You are in the public eye. You are you're thought of as a media member. So there is a lot of responsibility that comes with that type of influence, and we're going to dive deep into all of that stuff. Neil, thanks for taking time out of your day to be on the podcast with us, and welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on the other side of this. For those who may not know, I am the producer of this show, and I'm not running In All Kinds of Weather, which most Gator fans probably know me as the In All Kinds of Weather guy. But when I'm not doing that, I am working for you, working on producing this show, working on helping generate leads for Stingray Branding. But having produced the show on the other side of the table here, it's cool to be on this side in the so-called hot seat.
Absolutely, yes. As we kind of dive into your story, why don't you share the background, right? What led you into founding In All Kinds of Weather, and what has guided you over the last 11 years to get to where we are now?
Yeah, so there are probably 2 sub-stories to go into here. Number 1, anyone who does anything in life for an extended period of time has to be doing so because there was a passion to do so. So I've been a Gator fan since I was a little kid. My mom went to the University of Florida. Her father, my grandpa, went to UF. Countless cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents, ancestors went to UF. My grandfather was also very good friends with Stephen O'Connell, who the basketball arena is named after, and a very influential person in UF's history, also one of the former presidents of the University of Florida. So I figured as a little kid the least I can do is cheer for the school. So I did not actually go to UF, which is something that's going to surprise a lot of people who listen to or watch this, but it's been ingrained in my veins ever since I was a little kid. There's a VHS tape of me at 2 years and 10 months old in pajamas running around doing the Gator Chomp as Florida was destroying FSU for the 97 Sugar Bowl, which gave them their first national title. So I count that. Been a Gator since literally I was a little kid. And the other sub-story to In All Kinds of Weather is that by nature, I'm a storyteller. I like to share other people's stories with the world, which is part of why I came to work for you initially as a copywriter before I grew into a larger role. But the role I took was as a copywriter because I liked to tell other people's stories, whether that's a roofer, a plumber, a law firm. We've worked with real estate agents. I've done blogs for probably 20 different industries, and it's because I like to share with the world what it is that makes them good, more specifically what makes them the best at what it is that they do. So the Florida Gators being a passion of mine, and writing and storytelling being a passion of mine, it felt like a pretty easy way to merge the 2 together and make it into a hobby.
Is it still a hobby today?
I would say it is a cross between a hobby and a business. There is money that we make off it. I have a staff now. I started it, and I'm sure we'll get into this too, but I started it as a teenager who got way too big for his britches way too early. Thought I could do whatever I wanted. That's a hobby. Being a little older now, no longer a teenager, having just turned 30, there is a level of elegance and maturity that has to come with doing anything that puts you in the public eye. So whether that's just tweeting, whether that's something I'm saying on our show, there's a level of tact that has to be put into anything. And that's where I'd say it's a business, at least in part, because hobby means you do whatever you want, whenever you want, because you like it. A business is something that you do, yes, because you like it, because you enjoy it. I would venture to say you enjoy parts of being a business owner. But there's tact. There has to be some intellect and calculations that go into the moves you make. You can't just do literally whatever you want whenever you want. So I would say it's probably still in that intermediate stage between a hobby and a business.
Makes sense. Yeah, you can't lose the passion. Otherwise, you lose your purpose, and it kind of flounders after that. So can totally understand that. As we hone in all kinds of weather, take me back to what launched it, right? Did you just wake up one day and you're like, man, I'm going to grow this huge following and I'm going to have lots of people love me and follow me and this is what I want to do forever? Or is it something that just kind of happened?
So it kind of happened in stages, in spurts. So the real passion to write and just tell the story came during the Tim Tebow years. For those of you who may not be sports fans, Florida had a few pockets of success throughout its history, but never really was very good consistently until the 1990s when a coach named Steve Spurrier came. He put them on the map for 12 years. Then he left. A coach came after him that wasn't very good. Florida descended back to mediocrity. And then a new coach came in named Urban Meyer, who got the Gators back to the previous heights that Steve Spurrier got them to in the 90s and kept them there. And that was when, because I was 13, 14, 15, I was still in that immature, like mid-teenage range. I thought, wow, this is awesome. I need to tell people about this. I need to tell my friends about this. I need to tell my relatives my thoughts on this. Because at that time, I was also a student assistant on my football team, on my high school football team. So I thought, yeah, let's write about this. Let's talk about this. Let's just talk a lot about this and get my thoughts out on the internet. So I started out writing for Bleacher Report, which is still going strong today. I then went from there to SB Nation, which is not doing as well today. There are reasons for that. We can talk about that more in detail down the road. But then eventually decided I want to be my own boss with this. I know what I think. I have a following of people who appreciate what I say. Some people don't, and I know we'll talk about that for sure. But a lot of people do. And I feel like I have what it takes to launch my own site. And honestly, I probably launched it a couple years before I was ready to, but in hindsight, I think it's worked out because I've learned quite a bit from running my own show.
So, in all kinds of weather, didn't just spring up. I mean, that's kind of crazy. You were writing for Bleacher Report in high school then.
Yeah, that's right. SB Nation too. So
whenever you're reading those articles, guys, you never know the age of the person that's writing the article. Yeah. Take it for what it's worth.
It's true.
Nowadays
they're probably just written by a bot, but that's another discussion.
That's a good point. Building a six-figure following is no small feat, right? There are lots of people that have this idea that they're going to create posts and that they're going to tweet things and they're going to post videos on TikTok and whatnot, and they're going to grow this massive following that's going to pay them lots of money. And I would be willing to say that somewhere in the ballpark of probably 99% of those people that have that idea fall on their face. You, however, did not. Let's walk through some of the biggest challenges that you overcome and how and the process that it took to get to the point where you have cumulatively over 100,000 followers across all of your platforms.
Sure. So the process, and I may be answering two questions at once here, but the process is really centered on adapting because the world is going to change around you. And one of the things that I will say I'm proud of for myself is I knew very early on what worked, and I knew very early on to repeat what worked. That's something that I'm still having reinforced today, as recently as a couple days before this recording, when you ran a 10X workshop, and one of the 10 commandments of marketing was repeat successful actions, another one of which was massive action. So I knew that early on, but what I didn't know was that things are going to change, and what is working now is going to be repeatable down the road, because the way people consume their content is very different now. 2010, 2012, 13, 14, 15, even people read a lot of stuff online. Now that was also a big shift from reading in the paper or a print magazine or a book like old times, but that was a change. And I thought, okay, well, that's been a change that I've seen happen in my lifetime. It's going to stay that way. Well, no, not really. So the biggest challenge for me was finally deciding, look, Neil, you can have the website. You should always have the website. You should never lose it. It should always have a presence online. But you got to tweak the amount of time that you're spending on it versus exploring other avenues. Because as I've gotten older, I've matured, and the Gators have gotten better and worse in times. But I've grown the number of people that have appreciated the things that I say and or write online, and yet the numbers for my written work have not always indicated that. So I had to go, all right, well, early on I've made some immature decisions, but that's not what's costing me viewers now. What's happening here? And the answer I didn't want to accept, but eventually had to accept, was people want their content spoken to them from a phone or a computer in video form. They want to be able to have it talked to them, and I'm still adjusting to that now. So I didn't actually start the podcast until 2020. I'd been eyeballing it in 2018 and 19, but I didn't actually launch it until 2020. So the podcast itself is only 4 years old. The website, the Twitter account, the Facebook page that have all those followers, and the original YouTube account where I just uploaded all the old Gator games. I just converted them into a playbackable fashion and uploaded them. But the podcast itself is only 4 years old, and that's been an adjustment for me because I've had to spend a lot more time on that and realize that that's got to be the focus of the operation here. It cannot just be a side piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, riding down on Fridays, getting ready for the game, right? That's usually my podcast day when I'm tuning in and listening to all the shows and what everybody's saying about the game coming up and getting a feel for all that stuff. I'm a pretty big Gator fan. I think I follow it pretty well, but the Monday through Thursday, I don't have time to listen, get on the boards, read the articles, watch shows. Like, life's just way too busy Monday through Thursday, right? So usually about Friday afternoon, 2-3 o'clock, I'm usually checking out of work, checking into Gator stuff, hitting the 4.5, 5 hour drive down to the game. And in that time period, it's like, all right, I got to get all my facts and my numbers and all that stuff ready to go. So if I'm at the tailgates and working with Florida Victorious and all the different entities that I'm connected to down in Gainesville, I can ensure that I sound like I know what the heck I'm talking about, right? Because I'm just not a number. I can't memorize stats and all that stuff like you do. You've got a mind that's incredible. You can recall things from 50 years ago whenever you weren't even alive. I can't recall a stat from Saturday. But, so I totally get that with, I will not be able to sit around and read articles all week by any means, but that couple hours Friday afternoon whenever I'm getting into game mode, for sure, I'm listening to the podcast and capturing all that content, getting ready. Basically, you kind of recapping everything you've written about all week.
Essentially, yeah. It's just, again, putting it out there for a different demographic. But, it's a responsibility that I take very seriously now. Again, just to go back to what you said earlier about, is it a hobby, is it a business? I realized that there's quite a number of people who rely on me. And I can't get a big head about that. I can't just say whatever I want. There's a responsibility. The public discourse is something that I take seriously. So it's my responsibility to guide everyone to the basis of reality and not just say whatever I feel like or whatever I'm thinking in the heat of the moment. Because one of the problems that I used to have, I'm very open about this, and it's still a struggle, but saying whatever I feel, unfiltered, unchecked, unproofread. Well, you can't do that if you want to be someone that everyone's going to trust and listen to. So the goal for me is something that actually you've taught me as a mentor of sorts. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. That has been the shift from hobby to business for me.
That makes sense. And that's a big thing, right? There's a difference between, I think the quote this week was a basement tweeter, right? Or there's a difference between being
someone in their rural Central Florida basements is something.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between being a rural Central Florida basement tweeter and a media entity, right? And being able to differentiate those two, I think matters whenever you have a brand the size that you do. As we look at, talking about that, right? There's you've had to make personal changes with who you are and the content you're delivering from that perspective, going from hobbyist fan to insider media member, trusted source of information. But looking outside of that, there's also been a plethora of changes that have occurred in the marketing world in the last 10 years, right? So going back to the days whenever you were basically building a brand off of condensing games into 15 minutes and uploading them on YouTube. And I recall watching those clips over and over again. It's what kind of launched you to some extent. As we look at the changes from then to now, what are some of those things that have shifted with the content that you create and the platforms that you deliver it on, and what changes have you had to make to mirror the changes of the platforms?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is my demographic that I started appealing to has also grown along with me. The people that have been with me from the from the start are no longer teenagers. They're no longer in their 20s. They're 10 years older, 11 years older now. So it's been adjusting to that as well. And then also back to what I said earlier about how the way people consume their content is either, if you're going to read written words on a website, it either has to be much shorter and simpler and sweeter and to the point, or it has to just have a lot of pretty pictures, GIFs, memes, videos embedded, which is another piece of the SEO that I have to work on. But the way that you have to write things to appeal to people and get Google to show it to people is very different now. So you can't just write it like you would write a memoir or a novel. You have to write it for SEO purposes and for people to be able to stay with it long enough to not click off the page within the first 15 seconds.
When I think the other option is have an incredible amount of value, because you put out a piece about a year and a half or 2 years ago, if I recall, it was a 6-month project that you took a ton of research and an insane amount of time, but went viral, right? I believe you had over 100,000 views, I think, within a matter of a couple of hours.
Yeah, and then it hit about 5.5 million within the first week. I mean, Georgia, FSU, Miami, Tennessee, LSU, Florida's rival schools were sharing it. Like, wow, I can't believe Florida used to employ this guy. That goes back to what I'm saying about you gotta not just say what you want. You can't just rant on about how this guy sucks and this is awful and this is unacceptable. You gotta do your research and tell people why. So I embedded myself with some players. I got their permission. I had to follow the journalistic code, but got enough people to go on record and say, hey, this is what happened behind the scenes. Here's some text messages. Here's this. There's one audio recording that wasn't very nice, that didn't paint someone in a good light. I didn't include that in the article, but part of what I wrote was based on an audio recording that someone just whipped out their phone and here, Neil, listen to this. This will tell you. Oh, that's not good. So that's what the guy was saying to you behind the scenes. And so it's a lot of work, not just in terms of writing, but in terms of meeting people. Hi, I'm Neil from All Kinds of Weather. Can I talk to you for just a couple minutes? Going from that introduction, that greeting, to getting them to trust you. It's not just one conversation where you can sit down with them for 2 minutes and get all you need. You got to peel back the layers to them and get them to trust you. And maybe in some cases even get a little vulnerable yourself and just say, hey, these are some of the struggles that I've had running my site, in life. I've had to deal with this and that. My life hasn't always been awesome. I'd like to think I've had a happy life, but it's not been without its bumps. So getting players to relate to me in the sense that, yeah, my life hasn't always been perfect either. I mean, I'll just give you one example of many. For those Gator fans who are probably watching this, Austin Barber, Florida's left tackle right now. Great kid. He's had a lot of things go right. Hasn't always been perfect for him. So being able to relate to him and share that common ground was what got him, I think, to be a little bit more open with me and give me some of the content that I used in that piece. Now, the other thing I want to point out too is, when we said earlier about a media entity that I am, I think that I like to describe in All Kinds of Weather as, again, when I talked about it being a perfect balance between a hobby and a business, I like to think of it All Kinds of Weather as a perfect balance, perfect hybrid between the fandom and the media side, because I don't ever want to lose the fandom. I don't ever want it to be completely non-existent in my coverage, because I think that's what makes it authentic. That's something that you talked about in your 10X workshop the other day, about how maybe just one take and upload, just shoot and record and upload, and people are going to relate to that and go, wow, that's real, that's authentic. Maybe he stumbled over his words, maybe he couldn't retrieve a word he wanted to use, but it's real, it's authentic, it's who he is in the moment. If I'm having a conversation with him in real life, that's probably what it's going to sound like. He's not just staring at a teleprompter and reading right off of it. So I want to keep that authenticity, and I'm not going to ever completely change into a different person, but I think the key is just to refine, to soften the edges a bit, mature, sure, grow up, be a more adult version of the kid I was when I first started the site.
So with a large audience comes a ton of scrutiny. As you look at if you have 100,000 people that are reading whatever you say, some of those aren't going to agree with what you're saying. And the people that we work with, we have one podcast that's very polished, that's in Florida sports. We have you that's a little less filtered. And people are, the base root word of, fan equals up to fanatic, right? Like, fanatic, yeah. Fan is short for fanatic. And that's what, let's be honest, if you're on Twitter and the message boards and all that stuff, you're probably a little bit more than just the person that turns the TV on Saturday. You're borderline going from fan to fanatic. Yeah. And people take their sports seriously. They are very opinionated about it. I would say almost more than politics. And they can get hot whenever it comes to their opinions of this stuff. And if you don't say with what they want to hear when you say it and how you say it, they can be pretty ruthless. So how have you handled some of that criticism and scrutiny over the years, and how have you changed to better handle that?
Sure. So when I first started out, especially when I was a teen in my early 20s, everyone that said something that I didn't like, I saw to be a personal attack, because I was immature. I didn't know better. I just thought everyone's going to love me. Like I said, I think I got too much success happen to me too early. I got too big for my britches. So whenever someone dared to challenge that thesis of mine, I would not respond very nicely. I would come right back out, guns blazing, like, all right, you want a war? Let's go. But that's not really the best way to deal with people 99.9% of the time. What I've learned now is I can pretty much read off a scorecard for why people don't like me. Whereas before it was, why don't they like me? Everyone likes me. Now I'm pretty self-aware, and I can pretty much guess one of 3 or 4 reasons. One of which is, well, he's too volatile and less filtered. I would maybe rephrase that to be he is very, very passionate about what he does, which again is something I don't want to lose. But maybe somebody wants to hear that things are going well when they're not. Good example being the first game of the Gator football season. Florida got embarrassed by Miami, a game that was expected to be a very, very closely contested matchup. Did not turn out to be. So in response, I listed off a myriad of different statistics as to how Florida's current coach, Billy Napier, has put Florida football in a historically bad place. These are just plain cold hard facts, such as, well, Billy Napier is 1-8 against his rivals, or the last time a Florida coach started out with 3 straight losing seasons was before Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Stuff like that, and people didn't like it. And I'm looking at the comments of people who don't like that, and I just think, okay, you know what? Fine. I gave you facts. I gave you history. I researched it, put the time into it. You just don't want to hear it. So you know what? Our content's not for you, because our content is for people who, regardless of whether they're optimistic or pessimistic by nature, our content's for people who want to know what's going on and don't want it to be sugar-coated or softened or sweetened for them. It's just the way it is. It's the raw, plain, hard reality of it. And so anyone's going to criticize me for being too negative at a time when the current Florida coach has lost more home football games than a prior coach lost in 5 years, and this guy lost more games than that in his last 3 games that he's coached. I'm just going to shrug my shoulders and make peace with it, because it's just not something it's not something I'm going to change. It's not something that I think should change.
Well, I think that if you're going to be an influencer, if you're going to have a following and your goal is to have tons of people tuning into to the content that you're creating, and regardless of whatever fashion it is, I think that you have to know who you are, and you've got to be willing to accept who you are, and that you're not going to, like, everybody on the planet's not going to agree with who you are. There are, it doesn't matter the industry, whether it's, sports, it's business, it's porn, like, it doesn't matter what it is. You've got to be comfortable with who you're going to be, and once you reach that point, you are able to tune out whoever it is, right? I mean, if you're in politics or religion, right, you're going to face lots of opposition because people don't agree with your opinion, and they feel that they have the right and that they should express that opinion as often and as loud as they possibly can to people, for whatever reason that may be, right? It's not an attack against you. It's them wanting to portray themselves into the world. And because you have an opposing viewpoint of what they do in that moment, you are now becoming the target. And I can totally relate with, you read the comments and you feel like it's a personal attack against you, and having to eventually shift the mindset to understand that they are not attacking you as a person. They're attacking the brand that's saying those things. But it's hard to separate the two when you as the person are the one creating the content that the brand is saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I will add that there do come some personal attacks, and I mean there has been, I hate to say it, it's been very, very limited, but there's been more than 0 people who have gone after my Jewish heritage since October 7th, when that all went down. And that's the kind of thing that I just go, okay, I mean, that's the easiest block I'll ever institute in my life. And chances are this is a guy that's not going to ever say it to you in real life. And if he does like approach hate crime territory, then I'll address that in the need that I need to. But until then, and unless that happens, because 99% of the time it will not, whatever. It doesn't. It's just not. It's not that serious. And like even when I do occasionally go back at trolls, even now, it's something that I'll do, and I'll go on to the next thing in my life. It's just not that. It's not that deep. It ain't that deep, as the meme says.
Let's kind of touch into building this following, right? Because that's a feat that, like we said earlier, lots of people have this idea. It's not so easy to do.
No, it's not.
What are some of the common pitfalls that influencers or people that are trying to build a big brand should be aware of to try to avoid falling into those pitfalls or easy traps that you had to kind of learn as you went through this process?
So I think the one of them is you don't want to be an influencer to be an influencer. The status that you'll achieve is going to come with a lot of hard work. It can't just be I want to do it because I want people to recognize me and I want paparazzi to follow me. And I say that not out of nowhere, but because I actually spoke at one of my younger cousin's career days a couple years ago. And I think this is while I was working for you, but in New Jersey. And I asked, all right, so what do you want to do? And one little girl, she was like 12, 13, 14, I think this was an 8th grade class. It's like, I want to be an influencer. And my initial reaction was, no, you don't. But I didn't say that. I said, okay, so have you thought about what it's going to take to become an influencer? She's like, well, I have a phone, I'm pretty, and I have some followers on Instagram. And I'm just like, okay, but that's not why people become influencers and stay influencers. You can try. You can think that's enough and you can get a following. I mean, if you're an attractive girl like in high school or college, yeah, you'll get a following. But then it takes work to keep that up, to keep posting relatable content, to whether it's like back in the days of Vine, when you had creators like a David Dobrik or Amanda Cerny or Lele Pons, they used their good looks, but there was brain activity behind it. It wasn't just something they did because I want people to like all these posts because I'm attractive. Or even if it's not attraction, it could be because you just like making merchandise. Well, I want everyone to see my merch. I'm wearing this polo, I'm wearing that shirt, I'm wearing that tank, I'm wearing that hat because I like it and I want people to see it. Yeah, but it takes time to create that merch, to design that logo, to test it, to ask your friends, hey, does this look good? Am I the only one that loves this? Are people going to buy this? Does this material sound right? Does this look right? Does it feel right on you? And then you have to maintain it and keep putting the work in to, as we talked about earlier, yes, repeat successful actions, but also another thing that you pointed out yesterday in the 10X workshop, or the other day in the 10X workshop, was even Chick-fil-A rolls out new products here and there. You can't just sell the same 2 or 3 things, or if you want to just be like a comedy content creator, you can't just make the same 4 or 5 jokes 100,000 times. The repeating successful action is you're going to have to come up with these videos that are 1 to 2 minutes in length, that are funny, that are tagged on the YouTube channel, that are SEO'd correctly if you have a site. But you're going to have the brain activity. The gears have to be spinning enough for you to create enough versions of this, variations of it, that you know what you're doing. So this little girl didn't think about any of that. So you can't just become an influencer because you want the status of it. You have to have a passion behind what it is you want to be an influencer in. You want to be a sports influencer, you want to be a TikToker who makes funny videos or Vines when that was a thing. You have to have a real drive and a desire to put the work in to keep doing this thing that you love over and over and over again for years at a time.
Well, that takes me to the next point, consistency.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's dive into that for a moment. How have you stayed motivated and to be consistent, and how have you ensured that you stayed consistent over an 11-year period of creating this content?
Because I want to be the best at what I do. And that is something that I think best, in a sense, is subjective. For example, you mentioned on the number 2 podcast, because the other guy that we talked about, Dave Waters, has been doing it for 5 years more than me. So I realized there's a lot of work to do to catch up to him. But this is in 2020. But I have to start a podcast. I can't just keep thinking about it or wondering about what it would be like or even testing it. We gotta go. Like, it's COVID, there's a pandemic, especially since I lived in New Jersey at the time, which is one of the last states to reopen. We gotta make moves here. The wheels have to get going here. Get it off the ground and then experiment as you go. You don't have time to slow cook this thing. Also, let's keep pushing out more website content, more tweets. Let's keep honing our relationships. At the time, I mean, one of my very close friends from before he ever even committed to the University of Florida to play football was a linebacker named James Houston. So talking to him, getting some ideas of what's happening behind the scenes in the locker room, just getting a feel for what's going on. maybe let's not parrot what he says because a lot of it's off the record, but maybe let's use it to come up with some, shall we say, educated opinions or educated predictions as to what's going to happen. And let's get that out there on YouTube, on the site, and on social media. And let's begin pushing this out in a little bit more creative ways. You talk about consistency. Well, some of that is testing the best times of day to post things. Because if you post every 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, you can't generate an audience on that. People's timelines are going to get clogged on Twitter especially. And you can't just put out YouTube videos every 3 or 4 hours. The consistency has to be with, what works, so get into a routine of doing what works and do it over and over and over again. It's not just a mass quantity of spam. You have to know what works for you, do it repeatedly, experiment maybe here and there to see other means, like other media, such as a YouTube channel and a podcast, but you have to know what works for you and then repeat that in large quantities, repeat successful action.
And so, whenever you're in that grind, right, and you're doing one or two podcast episodes a week, and you're making 4 or 5 articles a week, and you're making hundreds of posts a week, and you're just pushing constantly in the grind of creating and sharing your thoughts. Is there a moment that you had or that you have had at some point where you kind of reflect back or it resonates to you that like what I say and what I am doing matters, that it creates, that there's an influence and it can create waves?
Yes. Very nice little subtle touch there. Waves. It's the name of the podcast. I noticed that. Yes. I will frequently get texts from players, from their parents, from mutual friends I have with players. I will get texts even from some people on staff. This current staff that Florida has probably doesn't like me very much because the results are the results, as we've talked about. I'm not going to be shy in telling people that the history of the Florida program does not align with what this current staff is doing, but with previous staffs, I would get some inside info here and there. And they would occasionally send me texts, or when I run into them after a game or something in Gainesville, they would say, I saw this, and then whether they said they liked it or not, either way, it would be a moment of, oh yeah, okay, they saw that. This is real. This is real. Like, again, Neil, like talking to my 19, 20, 21-year-old self, you can't just say whatever you want. So when you talk about being a little bit less filtered, again, it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act between hobby and business, a balancing act between fan and media. I'm not media. I'm not just a fan. There's a middle ground there. So be the best version of that I can be, because there are people that are in positions of power. There are people with more knowledge of what's happening behind the scenes than I am, that I'm going to rely on for those relationships to get more information as to what's happening that you probably don't want to piss off. So just be careful. Even if they say, yeah, I love this tweet, it's another reminder, oh yeah, they saw that. Or, hey, I love that clip you did. Or, I love that soundbite you had on how Napier's tenure is historically bad. A player's parent said that to me not long ago. Oh, parents of current players are comprehending that I am the one stating that this program is currently in a historically bad place with all these facts to back it up. Okay, yeah, that's great. You did a great job on that. But let's remember that these are people that you need to like you, or you need to at least not hate you, that are watching and reading and consuming your content.
Well, and the people that you're talking about are people.
Yeah, so the motto of the In All Kinds of Weather podcast, and more broadly the In All Kinds of Weather brand as a whole, is keep it respectful but keep it real. There are human beings that are working for the University of Florida that we have to be respectful of, and it's not ever personal. The one exception, and I have gone this way before, is if there is a moral issue with something that's happening. I mean, people watching, listening to this, I'm sure know about Jerry Sandusky at Penn State, Larry Nassar at Michigan State. If there's a situation where it comes out, for example, that a coach or a doctor or something is sexually assaulting our female athletes, oh yeah, I'm going after the person because that's disgusting. And there's a moral and there's a right and wrong issue here that's violated, and that's the human being who's committing those awful acts. But short of that, it is a game. It is just a sport. Now, it's a consequential one because I would say people are spending thousands of dollars every year to support these players and coaches and administrators traveling to games. You and I have 10 hours in a car round trip to go down from Charleston. People come from Miami. People come from Atlanta. People come from South Alabama to go to these games. Gator Nation is everywhere, and that means far outside the reaches of Gainesville, Florida, and Alachua County. So there's travel that goes into this, the tickets themselves, the food, the gas, and which is part of travel. But people have a right to be irritated if the games aren't going well. But then there has to be that balancing act of remaining upset with the play, with the actions that are taken on the field and in the press box or in the coaches booth by the coaches, while not making it personal about the players. Because if a player drops a pass, all right, you have to take the physical action that you're on scholarship for as a player to catch the ball. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're abusing someone off the field or that you're lazy in the classroom. It doesn't mean any of that. It's just a strict football failure. And if you're talking about strictly the game itself, I feel like anything you see on tape should be fair game to talk about, but keep it there. Don't bring in and don't even insinuate that, oh, this guy's just a loser, which is a pretty genuine, broad statement. But if you just say it like that, if you just say those 4 words, this guy's a loser, you could lend yourself to other people saying, oh, well, this guy's going after his person. This guy's going after the human being behind that. And that's what we do everything in our power to avoid. Keep it respectful, but keep it real.
So as we kind of think through where you're at today, one of the things that's massive with being able to grow a following and obtain ad dollars from articles and get people to tune into your content and all that stuff is building an audience. There has to be people that are interested in reading, listening, and watching what you're putting out. How do you handle, what strategies have you used to cultivate your audience and keep them engaged with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, again, the name of the game for me is a balancing act. There's, on one side, you have to repeat the successful actions, which we talked about earlier. And on the other side, you've got to adapt and change with the times because the times are changing. People are changing in what they want. I say this as not an attack on any one person, but I think as a society, people are getting lazier because it is less work to have words spoken out of your phone or your iPad to you from a video than it is to read the words on a screen. So adapting to that, adapting to the changing demographics, and I mean, it's just a matter of maintaining the passion while keeping the tactfulness and the business and the end goal in mind, and just marrying those two concepts. Because I feel like whatever it is that you do, if you want to start your own, whether it's a side business or your own full-time company like you did, a branding agency, don't ever lose what it was that made you want to start it, but be willing to have days or weeks even that are less fun in order to do what you know is best for your business. So again, don't change so much that you want to just bury yourself in the ground and not ever have to get out and face the real world and its responsibilities. But you have to do enough that you're going to position yourself for long-term success. And that's something I've had to do too. I mean, with my professional career, working for you, working in a previous job, I worked for the Washington Wizards and Capitals up in D.C., worked a tennis tournament there, which is fun, but not so much when you have to work until 2, 3 a.m. to get a video done the next day so they can run it at 9:30 a.m. on Twitter. So again, just realizing, all right, I don't like this task, But Neil, you gotta do it. This video has to go out the next morning. Same with you, I'm sure. You know what? I'm sure you've been in this spot too. I gotta write this contract for this guy. I gotta craft this proposal, and it's gotta be in his inbox by 9:30 tomorrow morning, because then, next Monday is Memorial Day or Labor Day or whatever, or Thanksgiving Wednesday. This has to be done now. It's gonna suck. I'm not gonna sleep well. I'm probably gonna be a wreck tomorrow. I'm gonna need extra caffeine in me, but this has to be done. Making sacrifices like that while not putting yourself in the point of, you know what, I'm so miserable with this, I hate this so much that I'm just going to quit and sell the business. Middle ground. Marry the concepts. Hybrid. Be in the middle.
So two last questions for you here. One of them would be, what advice would you give somebody that is either in the middle of building a brand and following, or that is considering doing so? What's kind of that biggest piece of advice, takeaway you have looking back on your last 11 years that you would tell that person? If you could go back and tell, 19-year-old Neil, this is what it's going to be, this is what you should do.
I think the first thing is, very quickly, and not to repeat myself, but don't ever lose your passion. Make sure that stays at the forefront of what you do forever. You can't ever make this turn into work. But the more important, I would say, answer, even beyond that, is surround yourself with people who love you and care about you, but are not afraid to tell you when something isn't going to work. Now, you as the business owner or the prospective business owner, you can and probably should have the ability to override a particular suggestion. I do that all the time. I have a COO for all kinds of weather. We butt heads a lot, but the reason I like him so much is because I know he has the business's best interest in mind. And one of the pitfalls that I fell into too early was, wow, I got 5,000 followers in like a month when I started in all kinds of weather. I can do anything I want. I can say anything I want. I can have any opinion that I want. I am like most people on earth. I'm good at some things and bad at others. One thing I'm really good at is writing. So I can take this opinion I have, I can use my linguistic skills to craft the English in a way that it's going to resonate with everyone, and I'll convert everyone on earth to believe it. Well, no, not really. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a set of goals that are very attainable, but you also have to make sure that you don't get too big for your britches. You can't just assume that because you have initial success, like what got me my first 5,000 followers, I mean, doing what I just explained, yeah, they're probably going to like it, or at least some of them will, but that's not going to get you the next 5. It's not going to get you the next 35,000 followers. You have to be willing to adapt and change with the times, and having people in your corner who aren't always going to agree with you, but who have your best interest in mind, are going to be the higher powers that you really need, especially when you're young, to make sure that resonates with you. Because when I was 19, 20, I'm the king. I know what I'm doing. I don't need your advice. I'm good. I got 5,000 followers. I got this site. I got it monetized when I was 19. Yeah, Google's paying me. Fox Sports is sponsoring me. Yeah, cool. I got money. I don't need your advice. And then I made mistakes that I wouldn't have made otherwise because I just turned on other people's advice. Also, I was self-taught in a lot of these fields. I went to school for media and communications. I took a couple journalism classes, but didn't really have the ability to go through every situation I'd ever possibly face, and thus made mistakes as a result. So I wish I had more mentors like you, like Chris, my second in command, in a sense, people who'd been doing what I've been doing, writers older than me, to tell me, you know what, Neil, that's not going to work. I know that you just went viral for these comments last time, but that's because it was timed perfectly, or because you just had a small enough following that you wouldn't reach people necessarily that didn't agree with you. It's not going to work long term. Don't do it. You can't make a living that way. So whatever it is that you do, have people around you that are going to be able to tell you no, and you'll listen to them.
So as we wrap up real quick, what's next? What's next for All Kinds of Weather?
What's next is continuing to grind, continuing to grow, continuing to Push the podcast. Like I said, that is the newest branch of In All Kinds of Weather. We have a new sub podcast that our graphics guy and our numbers guy Dustin Smith is launching. So he uses just plain numbers and numbers only and advanced numbers and all for the math people out there. You'll like this show, but it's not necessarily our focus. We'll talk numbers on the main show, but we don't go into as much detail with it as he does. So being able to add new sub shows, new sub podcasts, and just being able to have something that resonates with more people. Because like we said, I'm never going to be the guy that every single Gator fan agrees with. But if I grow to a large enough following, I can have people work for me or beneath me that do their own thing that will. And that can become a point of entry. And as I grow and mature and just become more refined in what I do, maybe while these people may not agree with me, they can say, okay, that's a fair and rational place to go for the other side. Like for people who watch Florida, who want to tune in to see what FSU is doing, Florida's rival, or Georgia, they'll tune into a Georgia show or an FSU show. They won't agree with a lot of things they say because they're rivals and they're not going to like each other. But they can say, okay, that's where I'll go to get the other side of the coin here. So even within Gators fan base, there are people who have different sides of every equation. So I want to appeal to people on the other side in that sense.
Very smart.
Thanks,
man. Great insight. Great
Thanks.
Great episode. As we wrap up today's episode, remember that in the face of adversity, there is always the potential for growth, resilience, and success. Join us every other Monday as we continue to explore inspiring stories of overcoming challenges to help you thrive in your journey of life.